Hello, my name is Brittany Jai. I am a junior at Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania, majoring in finance and political economics with minors in Middle East studies and Arabic. For my project, I decided to talk about the Iraqi War and why it was a mistake. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history and America's involvement in Iraq and the broader Middle East. This table shows all the U.S. involvement with Iraq since the late 80s. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but I will leave a link to this timeline in the description. Some key events between the United States and Iraq are Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the assassination attempt of George H.W. Bush in 1993, Operation Desert Strike in 1996, Operation Desert Fox in 1998, Operation Iraqi Freedom and the capture of Saddam Hussein in 2013, the first and second battles of Fallujah, George W. Bush's announcement plan and deployment of surge coalition troops in 2007, Barack Obama's plan to end combat operations in Iraq in 2009, 2010, and finally all the troops leaving Iraq in 2011. So why war? Where did it all begin? Well, one reason for the war was Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was the fifth president of Iraq. He was the leader of the Iraqi branch of the Ba'ath Party. Hussein brutally suppressed Kurdish and Shia uprisings and committed genocide against the Kurds. Another reason for the Iraqi war was September 11th and the aftermath. On September 11, 2001, four coordinated terrorist attacks by al-Qaeda hit the U.S. These attacks caused George W. Bush to prioritize disarming Iraq. He realized the vulnerability of the United States. He also believed that Iraq was in possession of and/or manufacturing weapons of mass destruction, as well as funding terrorist groups. However, some miscalculations led to the war. Unfortunately, President Bush and his administration made some hasty and miscalculated decisions. The idea that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction was an assumption. No weapons were ever found. The Bush administration also failed to understand the ethnic and cultural differences that saturated Iraq. They also underestimated the costs and overestimated the gains of the Iraqi war. So what are the consequences of the war, and why do I consider it a failure? For starters, although Iran no longer possessed a threat to the neighboring region, the war crippled the country, leaving it with little funds to create any army capable of defensive measures, let alone the offensive. With Iraq disabled, there was no other regional force to keep Iran in check. The U.S. had long played the two regions against each other to keep any one country in the region from becoming too powerful. The weakening of Iraq increased the threat from Iran and allowed for the rise of radical Islamic groups such as ISIS. The war also caused the destruction of property and infrastructure. In addition, women's rights were set back and the unemployment rate reached an astonishing height of 60%, resulting in the significant decrease in the standard of living for Iraqi citizens. However, Saddam Hussein was removed from power and his regime was replaced by a democracy. Another reason I think the war was a failure is the U.S. Army was deplorably unprepared for the unconventional Iraqi war. They had little education and training and were using outdated strategies and equipment. However, they quickly adapted and wrote new manuals and acquired new equipment. However, the main reasons why I believe the Iraqi war was such a failure are the economic and human cost. The Iraqi war was not cheap. Defensive costs alone equal $806 billion and increased the national debt and deficit spending. However, the indirect costs of the Iraqi war, such as funds to support future veterans and money paid to the families of soldiers killed in action, are expected to exceed $2 trillion. And the human cost is considerable as well. The casualties from the U.S. Army alone were 4,287, with an additional 30,182 wounded. More than 100,000 Iraqi civilians have died from war-related violence since 2003, but the casualties are only a fraction of the human cost. Mental health among active and reserve soldiers returning home from Iraq is substantial. A longitudinal assessment of mental health problems among active and reserve soldiers returning from the Iraqi war concluded that 20.3% of active soldiers and 42.4% of reserve soldiers required mental health treatment. It is obvious that the cost outweighed the gains. Although Saddam Hussein was overthrown and the threat of weapons of mass destruction in the country dismissed, more conflict and violence followed. America's national debt increased, and many lives have been destroyed due to death and mental disease. I don't believe it was worth it. Nothing good ever comes from war. Thanks for watching.